Why knowledge matters.
We have so many of these studies. One that people might enjoy is a chambermaid study. Chambermaids, interesting, they work all day long, but according to the Surgeon General, which they took as truth, that exercise is what you do after work, and they're too tired. So they're exercising all day long, but they don't see that they're exercising. So all we did was divide them into two groups, and we taught half of them that their work was exercise, just changing their mind about what they're doing. Okay, and they're doing this for a couple of weeks. They're not eating any differently. They're not working any harder or less hard. Nevertheless, by simply changing their mindset to now see their work as exercise, they lost weight. There was a change in waist to hip ratio, body mass index, and their blood pressure came down. Our minds are so much more powerful than we realize, and we've just begun, I think, to scratch the surface. So that's a good part of the book. But then there are lots of other things in it that I think people might find interesting. Let me backtrack for just a moment. That when I started this book, it was going to be a memoir. So there are lots of very personal stories in it, for better
But I
or
just
worse.
quickly want to say something
Yeah.
to this because it's very important that actually your study with the elderly home was intended to become a movie. And
Yeah.
the star who was playing you was Jennifer Aniston. You even
Right.
also talk about this anecdote and how incredible this actually is. So you jumped a little bit ahead. I have so many
Okay.
questions. So just please go ahead. Thank you so
Okay.
much.
Well, what I was going to say was, in line in terms of support for the idea that we haven't even begun to realize the kinds of lives we could be living, not just longer, but richer, happier. And there are things that psychologists teach us that take us from a bad place to a better place. But what I'm trying to do is go well beyond that. So a simple little thing. So trying to do something. Now, trying is of course better than, presuming you can't do anything. But trying has built into it the expectation for failure. When I go down to the kitchen in the morning, oh, no, let me say it differently. If I gave you an ice cream cone, I wouldn't tell you try to eat it. All right. So we give people tasks. We have one group try, another group just do it. And the doing group always outperforms the trying group. Where I was headed a moment before is hope. Hope sounds good, right? It's certainly better than being hopeless. But still, hope has built into it, again, a notion of failure. You don't go into the kitchen, this is the example I was confusing a moment before, and hope there'll be coffee. You just assume there's going to be coffee. All right. Now, one of my favorites is about forgiveness. Now, under certain circumstances, surely forgiveness is better than not forgiving. However, even that has problems that limit us. So, I was asked to give a sermon at one of the Harvard temples, at churches. And I'm not religious. I thought, what can I talk about? And I thought, okay, forgiveness sounds sort of relevant. I mean, it's not a godlike concept, but at any rate, so I started thinking about forgiveness. And Yannick, I came up with something that was actually sacrilegious, I think. If you ask 10 people, is forgiveness good or bad? What are they going to tell you? Forgiveness is good. If you ask 10 people, is blame good or bad? What are they going to tell you? It's bad. But you can't forgive unless you first blame. So that's interesting. Our forgivers are our blamers. Now it gets worse. Do you blame people for good things or bad things? Well, you blame people for bad things, but things in and of themselves are neither good nor bad. It all depends on how we understand them. So what we have here is the people who see the world negatively blame and then forgive. Hardly divine. And so the alternative to all of this is to recognize that from the person's perspective who's doing whatever action, it makes sense or else they wouldn't do it. And so if we understand why they did what they did, there's no need to forgive. But certainly, if you blame, you're better off forgiving. What I'm saying, there's an even better way of being. And this idea of behavior makes sense from the actor's perspective is very powerful, I think, because there's always a tendency for us to compare people and who's better in this way or that way, and we disparage people. Many people are very evaluative. And next time you find yourself saying something negative about somebody, recognize you're probably being mindless. And if you ask yourself, what sense does that make from that person's perspective, you may come up with a very different understanding. So for instance, Yannick, people can't stand you because you're so inconsistent. That's because you're flexible. People hate me because I'm so gullible. That's because I'm trusting. Every single negative word to describe somebody has an equally strong but oppositely valenced alternative. And so when you recognize it, you might want me to change and stop being so gullible, but when you recognize that's only happening because I'm trusting, you probably wouldn't want me to change. So you can see how becoming more mindful, because when you're mindful, you see things in multiple perspectives, you have many more choices available to you, that relationships improve, and we just care about ourselves more, and by extension, other people as well.
That's why knowledge matters. Make your life a masterpiece. Visit now programs.d-ykm.com.